Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn Bamford, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert in the economy to tell their story and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as discuss potential solutions for job growth and prosperity. The COVID shutdown in Ontario and Canada were some of the longest and most drastic measures in the world and had a devastating economic and societal impacts. Joining us to discuss today is Barbara Barrett, Executive Director, Frontier Duty Free Association. Barbara has held senior leadership and executive roles for Jaguar Land Rover, a leading global automotive company. Barbara has implemented and developed communication program in both Formula One racing and the Invictus Games, as well as the Canadian Cancer Society and some First Nation groups. Barbara holds an honors Bachelor of English from Nipissing University and is the proud holder of a black belt in karate. Welcome to the program, Barbara.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Barbara, can you tell the viewers what the Frontier Duty Free Association does?
So we represent the land border duty-free stores that are on the Canadian side of the land border as you enter into the United States. We're an export-only business. So once you enter the store, you need to exit into the United States. You can't come back into Canada. And they're all family-run, independently owned businesses that have been a part of the tourism fabric in Canada for over 30 years now.
So how much in revenue do the duty-free shops generate for Canada?
So we would represent probably over $1 billion in revenues over a 10-year period. We represent about 35 million in taxes into the country every year. We have invested over 60 million in border communities. We have over 2,500 full-time and part-time employees, and often are just integral parts of the border communities. A big part of the tourism fabric of border communities. It's usually the last thing people see as they're leaving Canada and entering into the United States.
So Canada had one of the harshest and most stringent lockdowns. Could you tell us how this affected the duty-free shops in Canada? I know your association members were very much hurting during the lockdowns.
So we very accurately call ourselves the hardest hit of the hardest hit. Understanding it was difficult on all Canadians and certainly most Canadian businesses, but we truly were the hardest hit of the hardest hit. We depend wholly on the border traffic and being able for people to be able to go back and forth over the border like a border community. When the border was shut down to essential workers only, basically we were shut down. Some stores were shut down completely, just put the shutters on. Other stores were able to stay open as they get some commercial traffic. So essential workers were able to stop in. But again, at the very most, they were 95% down. So it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating, and it stayed that way for about 20 months. I don't know what business or what business model can be expected to survive and thrive with being shut down essentially for about 20 months.
Yes, absolutely devastating your members. How did they even survive all this? Because not only did they have to deal with the shutdowns, then they had to deal with the Arrive Can and some of the mandates, vaccine mandates that prevented the free flow of traffic. So how did they even survive this whole situation?
So we were able, most stores were able to survive on the government subsidies with the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy. Some did not receive that, and to be honest, some didn't survive. However, we were very grateful for those subsidies and did get our stores through. That said, even once the border opened, we had these measures still on the border. The border was still sticky. People were not traveling back and forth. The Arrive Can was an issue. the vaccine mandates or the vaccine requirements were an issue.
So
People weren't.
I'm going to stop you there because we're going to get more in depth, but we have to go to commercial. We'll be right. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Don't go away. Welcome back. I'm talking with Barbara Barrett, Executive Director of Frontier Duty Free Association. Before we went to the break, we were talking about the impact on the lockdowns on the duty free shops. Barbara, the Frontier Duty Free Association produced a report that talked about a 45% decline in summer business. Can you tell us about this?
So once the border was essentially open again, that is more than essential workers were allowed to travel over the border. We still had ArriveCan as a requirement to cross back into Canada, and we had vaccine requirements for people to come into the country. So for us, really, the border was not completely open yet. There wasn't that free flow of traffic that we depend on 100% for our business to be viable. So even though the border was technically open, it really wasn't open for us. So in our high season, summer season, we were still 45% down across the board, across Canada. And after 20 months of being essentially shut down, this is still devastating. We weren't on the road to recovery really until this October, and even now we're just celebrating being just 25 to 30% down across the board.
Wow, just devastating. Barbara, you were instrumental in creating momentum around the efforts to drop the ArriveCan. Could you tell us a little bit about your efforts there? I know that Mayor Diodati from Niagara had commended you on how your efforts were to remove this. Could you talk about this and how the ArriveCan app impacted the duty-free shops?
So I don't want to take any credit myself on that. I give all the credit to the mayors who dug in and they, I mean, really, as border communities and border community businesses didn't have a choice but to speak out about the ArriveCan app and the measures on the border. That border is very, very special. It's a gem that we have this in North America. And to have it shut down like that, it was just devastating on the border community. So I commend the mayors for all the work that they did. They were not shy about speaking out, and ultimately the federal government listened to them. So I give all the credit to Mayor Diodati and to his mayor colleagues for getting that done. The second part of your question, I think, was what effect the ArriveCan app had.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So it stopped the habit of people driving back and forth. It became cumbersome to drive across the border. And that's not how a border community works. Border communities need that sometimes people in border communities go back and forth, a number of times in a day, but that was stopping. Additionally, it stopped the habits of Americans coming up because they were afraid of having to use it, didn't know how to use it. Seniors were having a very difficult time using it and just would decide not to come across the border at all instead of trying to use the ArriveCan app. So busloads full of tourists were just not coming. If you talk to officials at the border, they would say, oh, we have 95% compliance using the ArriveCan app. It's great. But what they weren't taking into account was the fact that people were just deciding not to come at all.
Absolutely. And I know people that would go for groceries or go for the weekend, on both sides of the border, that just decided that was just too cumbersome. The elderly, families going to hockey tournaments, all of that came to a grinding halt. But Barbara, what is the biggest challenge for your associated companies today? How are they going to dig themselves back out of this hole?
So a couple things. We need help with getting the word out there to Americans, to others who may not know that the ArriveCan is now optional and that the border is now unsticky, is one way to put it. That education hasn't gone across the border, and the habits have changed. Americans have changed their habits now. Not all of them, but a number of them have changed their habits. So we need to re-educate so that we can get those habits back. And get the Americans coming back over the border and getting that free flow of traffic back and forth the border again. The other thing I would say that we need, as a group of an industry that is licensed by the government, that was shut down because of the decision to close the border, we need help financially to get us through this long cold winter after being basically shut down for 3 high seasons.
So advertising, get people to come back and help you get through the season. We need to go to break, but when we come back, we're going to hear more about how we can help the duty-free companies on the border. We'll be right back. Barbara, what do you see as the future for those in the Frontier Duty-Free Association?
Listen, we're a successful business model that's been part of the tourism fabric in Canada for over 30 years, as I mentioned. So our business model is successful. We know this, but we need help just to get through to the other side of the winter after losing 3 summer seasons, so that we can be on that track to be successful again. And we're not asking for a handout; we're just asking to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when the borders, as you mentioned, were opened up, we definitely saw people with the ArriveCan and not wanting to participate. But your members were not only faced with border closures and the ArriveCan and the vax. A lot of them didn't get any financial assistance towards the end of the pandemic lockdown. Can you tell us about that and how they differed from other businesses that were also in tough situations with some of these mandates?
So we did receive financial help in terms of the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy throughout the beginning of the pandemic, but those tapered off at the end or in the middle of last year. So we were then stuck with not having any financial help after that. Because of these measures on the border, we didn't even see the road to recovery, let alone be on it yet. So what we would like to see is some financial help to get us out of this hole. But yeah, I mean, we did receive some financial help, but because we are niche and we're unique, I understand that it's difficult for the government to help everybody. But it's time, I think, to look at some funding for border communities and have it transferred to businesses like ours through border community businesses funding, because we're falling through the cracks in such things as the Tourism Relief Fund. We don't qualify for that. So any of these other programs that are still existing, we just don't qualify for.
Yeah, and certainly the ArriveCan app dissolved after the summer travel season, so you really didn't catch a break on that side of it either. So, Barbara, do you have any indication that the government has done some sober thought to the lockdowns and their impact and their devastating impacts? Do you think they learned any lessons from the last 3 years?
Listen, they told us that they were not going to move on the ArriveCan app at all. They told us not to talk to them about it. They weren't moving. They heard us. They listened, and they did move on it. So clearly, there was some listening and some learning going on. So I think it's easy to be critical but when you're not doing it. So I do think that they are learning, and they're hearing us. Not as quickly and not as much as we would like, obviously, but the fact that they did drop the ArriveCan when they told us that they weren't going to do it at all is an indication that they are hearing us. Again, I would like them to do it faster and hear more and hand me a bag of money, but we know that that's not going to happen.
Now, let's circle back at the beginning of our discussion. You mentioned how integrated the duty-free shops are with the communities. Could you just highlight some of the ways in which they are integrated with the communities around them?
Again, it's the last point often the last point of Canada that people see before they go into the United States, because once you enter into the store, you have to exit into the United States. But many of these stores have been there for 35 to 40 years. And the families are pillars of the community, and their families, they've employed a number of families in the community. They invest millions of dollars into their sites, which it puts investments into those communities. So they're an integral part of not just border communities, but the tourism fabric as a whole in Canada.
So we just have about 30 seconds before we go to break. What would you like the average Canadian to know about the Duty Free Association and your members?
We are family-run, independently owned businesses. We're not, you go into the duty-free stores in the airport; those are owned by bigger conglomerates that are not Canadian-owned. All of the land border duty-free stores are independently owned and family-run. So when you go into one of those stores, you're supporting a Canadian small business. So I would encourage everyone to please go out and support those businesses who have been devastated so much by the COVID restrictions and the border closure.
Great stuff. We're going to go to break. Welcome back. Before we went to break, we were talking about the impact of the COVID lockdown on the duty-free business. Barbara, this is the part of the show that every week I ask my guests if they were a politician, what 3 things they would do to grow jobs and the economy. Barbara, you're on the hot seat. Tell us what you would do.
Oh boy. Okay. So firstly, I think it's much easier to sit in judgment and watch than it is to actually do. And I also understand that my perspective is that of a niche industry, and that has been devastated by the pandemic. But here we go. First, I would listen to businesses who are most affected by border measures. Understanding that the government can't help every single business, I think they need to listen to the border communities who were most affected by the border closures that, to no fault of their own, devastated these businesses and then businesses like ours. I think there's an argument to be made that for a border community financial aid that can be given to the border communities that were affected by these border closures, and then have the money transferred to businesses like ours, but also other businesses that were affected by the border closures. I do think that we did our part when the border was shut down to help keep Canadians safe. They said that was a thing that needed to be done to help keep Canadians safe through COVID. We paid the price. I think that we need some financial help given that we did this to help keep Canadians safe. Secondly, I would cut red tape. Businesses like ours are subject to bureaucratic rules that don't make any sense and stop us from doing our business, which is essentially stopping us from getting on that road to recovery. An example is that our businesses are subject to domestic labeling laws or rules, despite it being an export-only business. This is costing us millions of dollars a year. So cut red tape, allow us to get back to business, stop with the bureaucratic rules. Number 3, I would reinstate the visitor rebate program. Canada is the only OECD country that doesn't have a visitor rebate program. Things are expensive. If we can cut taxes for give our visitors some sort of incentive to come and visit us more frequently, I think that'll help the tourism businesses and businesses like ours recover. We used to have one. It was cut just over 10 years ago, and it's time to reinstate it. And I'll even give you a 4th. I would ensure that we never do this to our border again. It is a jewel that we are so lucky to have and share with our southern neighbor, and to have it shut down and to have it measures on it such as they were was devastating to both countries. It is a gem. And it should never happen to that border again.
Couldn't agree with you more on all of those 4 things. Very sensible. I do want to ask you, supply chain is affecting every business. Is it affecting the duty-free shops?
Oh, absolutely. Now that we are starting to be back in business, we're trying to restock our stores, and getting those supplies is not only more difficult, but it's substantially more expensive. So they're definitely feeling the pinch that way as well.
So, last question for you, Barbara, before I let you go. Has the staggering cost of fuel impacted those in your association? Because we're hearing from everybody that they're impacted by this.
Yeah, I don't have any measurement on that. I can only say that I'm sure that it is. I mean, if people are choosing not to get in their car and drive because it's more expensive, that ultimately does affect our business. So all of these are pieces of the puzzle that are making it more difficult for us to recover.
Well, thanks, Barbara, for taking the time to talk to us about the duty-free shop. Certainly, it is an area that a lot of people just didn't have any visibility on. And the fact that we're talking about mom and pop stores, private
Yeah,
ownership, entrepreneurs, I mean, that's really the Canadian dream. So certainly there
really is.
needs to be something done to assist those shops for coming back and get out of the hole that we're in. So thanks, Barbara, for taking the time. We appreciate your
Thank you.
thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to my guest, Barbara Barrett, Executive Director of Frontier Duty Free Association. The approach to the pandemic in Ontario and Canada has been devastating to the economy. Many small to medium-sized businesses were left to fend for themselves, and that leaves us wondering if the governments at all levels had learned their lesson. Will there be some sober reflection and a better plan going forward? We certainly hope so. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovators. If you're an innovator, tell us your story. Write to us at ideas@thenewsforum.ca, and we'll see you next time.